Let me tell you something about how relationships have changed. You know, I'm 68 years old and grew up in a very different time. I'll explain to you what we're experiencing these days. When I was young, in my early 20s, relationships were different. Women generally expected us men to make all the decisions, but today? Oh, today is a completely different story. Just last week I had coffee with a very interesting lady, Mrs. Betty, 65 years old. She's a businesswoman, travels the world, and has strong opinions about everything. You know what happened? She told me straight to my face, without beating around the bush, that she didn't like the restaurant I chose. In my time, women usually accepted the man's choice, even if they didn't like it much. And that's not all. Women my age today are different from what I was used to. They insist on splitting the bill. Some even insist on paying for everything. They have their own houses, their cars, and don't need a man for anything. It's beautiful to see, but I confess that sometimes I feel a little lost. The other day I was talking to my friend Bob, and he told me he ended a relationship because his girlfriend, also in her 60s, wanted him to participate in dance classes. He didn't want to, but she insisted, saying it was important for her to have a partner who shared her activities. In our time, women usually adapted to their husband's tastes, right? Sometimes when I'm on a date, I get nervous about saying certain things. Women today are very direct and not afraid to disagree or debate. If I say something they don't agree with, they quickly come back with a, "That's not quite right," or "I disagree with you." This is good, of course, but for someone who grew up in another era, it can be quite challenging. That's why many of my friends prefer to stay single. Charlie, my 70-year-old neighbor, always says, "I prefer to stay in my corner, watching my favorite TV show, than having to explain every decision I make." I understand him, you know. Sometimes it's tiring to have to adapt to so many changes, but I also greatly admire these modern women. They are independent, know what they want, and aren't afraid to pursue their goals. It's different from what we're used to, but maybe it's time for us to change a little bit too, don't you think? Oh, let me tell you about how I learned to enjoy my own company. You know, after I retired at 62, I discovered a whole new world of possibilities that I had never imagined before. For 35 years, I worked in a company where I had to follow rigid schedules, had meetings, appointments, and at home it wasn't any different. Married, with children, there was always someone needing something. Don't get me wrong, I loved my family, but it was tiring. These days, wow, what a difference. I wake up when I want, usually early because it became a habit, you know. So I take my time with coffee, reading the entire newspaper. Nobody rushes me, nobody complains that I'm taking too long. If I want to spend the whole afternoon tending to my garden, I do. If I want to watch documentaries about World War II, which my late wife hated, I watch as many as I want. My most faithful companion is Rex, my dog. I adopted him 5 years ago after I became a widower. He doesn't complain about my choices, doesn't argue with me about politics, and is happy just being by my side. We take our walks together every morning in the park nearby. The other day, my youngest son came to visit and was worried. "Dad, don't you feel lonely?" he asked. You know what I answered? "Son, there's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. I'm alone, but I don't feel lonely. The truth is, I've learned to enjoy these little freedoms. Just last week, I decided to take a trip to Aspen. I packed my bag in 15 minutes and went. I didn't have to coordinate with anyone, didn't have to wait for anyone to pack or plan an itinerary that pleased everyone. I went at my own pace, visited the places I wanted to. At home, everything has its place, the way I like it. My stamp collection is displayed on the living room shelf. Before I had to put it away because it didn't match the decor. My fridge only has the foods I like. If I want to have popcorn and cola for dinner, don't tell the doctor. Who's going to stop me? Of course, sometimes I miss having someone to talk to in person, especially at night. But for that, I have my friends from the chess club where I go 3 times a week. We have our games, our conversations, but at the end of the day, everyone returns to their own corner, their peace. As my friend Albert says, after 60, we learn that we don't need an audience to be happy. And it's true. The solitude that once scared me has become an old friend, one that we learn to respect and even like. Let me tell you how difficult it is to find a new love when you live in a small town like mine, Millbrook. I've been living here for 40 years and know practically everyone, which sometimes hinders more than helps. You know how it is, right? Here we only have 2 places where people my age meet. The retirement club on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Sunday Mass. At the club, always the same 15 people. At church, well, everyone has known everyone for decades. The other day, my son tried to teach me how to use these dating apps on the phone. He spent an entire afternoon explaining to me how this Tinder thing works. But here in our region, there's almost no one my age using it. The few people who show up are all from Lakeville or Pine Grove, neighboring towns. And to tell you the truth, I don't feel very comfortable with this swipe right or left thing. It feels like I'm choosing fruit at the supermarket. There was this one time I went to a senior citizens dance in Fairview. I was excited, got all dressed up, put on my best shirt. When I got there, guess what? It was practically the same people I meet at the retirement club. Mrs. Nancy, who organizes these events, even jokes. Here it's like a Mexican soap opera. Everyone has already dated everyone. And there's another problem. Many of the ladies my age around here don't want to know about a new relationship. As my friend Teresa says, I've taken care of a husband all my life, now I want to take care of myself. Others are already busy taking care of their grandchildren full-time. I even tried going to other places. I started going to water aerobics. They said it was good for meeting new people. But out of the 12 people in my class, 10 are married, one is a nun and the other, well, she's my ex-sister-in-law. My friend Joe always says, in our time it was easier. There were dances, church festivals, family parties where someone's distant cousin always showed up. Nowadays it seems like everyone is in their own world. People our age prefer to stay at home watching TV shows or talking to their children on WhatsApp. I even thought about moving to a bigger city where I'd have more opportunities. But then I look at my house, my backyard, with the trees I planted, my neighbors who have known me for so long, and I think, is it worth trading all this for a chance to meet someone? And there's more. When someone interesting shows up, I soon find out they're related to an acquaintance or an ex-wife of a friend of a friend. In a small town like ours, this complicates everything. As the saying I invented goes, in a small town every romance has a history, and everyone already knows every history. Look, after 45 years working as an accountant, I learned one thing. Money doesn't bring happiness, but it brings peace of mind. And that peace of mind at my age is worth its weight in gold. Let me tell you my story. I worked hard to build my assets. I started as an office assistant, saved every penny, built a nest egg. I managed to buy my apartment, I have my car paid off, a 2015 Civic that I take care of like a baby, and savings for emergencies. It's not much, but it allows me to live without worries. Last month I met Margaret at a cafe nearby. Beautiful lady, very elegant, we talked for hours. But when she started talking about the debt she has with the bank, because of the loan she took out to help her son, you know that sinking feeling in your stomach? Well, that's it. I kept thinking, what if we start dating and she needs financial help? How am I going to say no? I have a friend, Sam, who got married again at 70. The new wife had a business that was going badly. End of story? He sold the farm that was supposed to be an inheritance for his children to help with her business. Now the business has closed, the money is gone, and his children barely speak to him. My retirement isn't the biggest, but I can take a trip once a year, buy my medications without struggle, and look, they're not cheap. And I still help my youngest daughter with my grandson's college tuition. If I enter a relationship now, how am I going to manage these finances? Carl, my neighbor from 302, always says, after 60, romance has to come with a clean credit report and accounts up to date. It seems like a joke, but it's the absolute truth. Can you imagine having to split your life savings or worse, inheriting debts from a new relationship? Once during a consultation, my doctor said something I never forgot. Mr. John, at your age, stress because of money can be more harmful than high cholesterol. That's why I think 2, 3, 10 times before getting involved with someone. It's not selfishness, it's survival. And there's more. I've already calculated what I'll need to maintain myself well in the coming years. Health insurance increases every year, medications too. I want to be able to, if necessary, pay for a good nursing home in the future without depending on my children. How can I risk this security that I've built? As my daughter-in-law says, father-in-law, health isn't everything, but without health there's nothing. That's why sometimes I prefer to keep to myself, you understand? At least alone I don't need to explain every time I need to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night because of my prostate. You know, there are things that time doesn't easily erase. It's been 12 years since I divorced Cecilia after 30 years of marriage, and sometimes I still wake up startled, thinking about everything that happened. I'm going to tell you something I've never told even my children. The other day, Teresa, that nice lady from the pharmacy, invited me for coffee. You know what I did? I made up a doctor's appointment that didn't exist. Why? Fear. Pure fear. After so long alone, you lose the knack, you know? I remember it like it was yesterday. In the beginning, after the divorce, my friends were always trying to introduce me to someone. Go on, Anthony, talk to my wife's cousin. Or, there's a very special lady at my church. I smiled, thanked them, but inside, I was shaking. How do you explain to them that just thinking about starting all over again gave me a tightness in my chest? There was this one time I gathered courage and went on a date. The lady was very polite, a retired teacher, but when she asked about my previous marriage, I stuttered so much that I spilled coffee on the table. It's as if all those memories came at once. The fights, the separation, the days in court. My friend Gerald always says, "Anthony, you need to turn that page." Easy to say, right? He's been married to the same woman for 45 years. He doesn't know how hard it is to trust again after you give your heart to someone and it comes back all bruised. And there's more. Nowadays, everything has changed. This business of sending messages on WhatsApp, choosing the right emoji. My granddaughter says I can't send kisses to just anyone. In my time, it was simpler. You sent flowers, wrote a little note. Now you have to know if the person saw the message, how long it took to respond. It's too much pressure. Once my daughter signed me up for a ballroom dancing group. "Dad, it'll be good for you to meet new people." I went to 2 classes and never went back. Every time someone approached me, I froze like a post. The teacher even joked, "Mr. Anthony, you don't need to be afraid. Nobody bites." But it's not fear of dancing. It's fear of getting involved, of getting hurt again. As Mrs. Lucy, my neighbor, who is also a widow, says, "We're not young enough to stumble and get up like before. Now every fall hurts more." And isn't she right? Oh, my son, let me tell you about this health story after 65. You know that phrase, health comes first? Well, it never made so much sense as now. I'll be honest with you, I've had type 2 diabetes for 8 years. Every day is that routine. Measure glucose, take medication, watch my diet. My daughter even bought one of those modern watches that count steps to encourage me to walk. But it's not easy to think about romance when you have to explain to someone that you need to stop in the middle of a walk to eat something sweet because your glucose dropped. I remember once I went out to dinner with Mrs. Margaret, a very elegant lady I met at water aerobics. Everything was going well until I had to take my medications in the middle of dinner. There were 5 different pills. She kept looking with a worried face. She never called me again. I think she thought, this one needs too much maintenance. And there's more. Since I had a minor heart attack 3 years ago, my cardiologist made it very clear that I need to avoid certain, how can I say, very intense activities. It's embarrassing to have to explain this to a potential partner, you know. How do you say, look, we can date, but take it easy, because my heart isn't the same anymore? My friend Robert, who also has health problems, always jokes, these days, before thinking about romance, we have to check if the health plans are compatible. It seems like a joke, but there's some truth to it. And it's not just the big problems. I have arthritis in my knees. Nothing serious, but it prevents me from dancing, which was one of the things I loved to do most. Once, at a party, a lady invited me to dance. I had to explain that I couldn't. She thought it was an excuse and got upset. How do you explain that it's not unwillingness, it's really a limitation? The medications don't help much either. Some cause drowsiness, others affect the, male vigor. My urologist even prescribed that famous blue pill, but with my heart medication I can't take it. It's complicated. Just the other day I was in a group of friends and Hank said, at our age when we meet someone, the first conversation isn't about zodiac signs, it's about which doctor we see. Everyone laughed, but it's true. We end up exchanging more information about medications than about likes and hobbies. As my daughter-in-law, who's a nurse, says, father-in-law, health isn't everything, but without health there's nothing. That's why sometimes I prefer to keep to myself, you understand? At least alone I don't have to explain every time I need to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night because of my prostate. You know, after I became a widower, I thought it would be easier to start over. But I learned that When you have grown children, grandchildren, and a family history, things get much more complicated. Let me tell you about a situation I went through last year. I met Mrs. Helen at the water aerobics group. Wonderful woman, also a widow. We got along super well. We started going out and everything was going great until our children found out. My oldest daughter, Rachel, was furious. "Dad, you barely know this woman. What if she's only interested in your money?" Peter, my middle son, was even more direct. "Dad, the house you live in is our inheritance. Don't do anything crazy." On Helen's side, it wasn't any different. Her children started making a fuss because she was going out too much and couldn't stay with the grandchildren every day like before. One of her daughters even said, "Mom, you've already had your life. Now it's time to help us with the kids." And that's not all. There was this Sunday when I invited Helen for lunch at my house. I made that bean stew everyone likes, rice, some meat. But when she arrived, my daughter-in-law made a point of showing all the photos of my late wife on the wall. "Look, this is Mary. She's the one who chose all this decoration." I was so embarrassed. Another problem is family events. Last month was my oldest grandson Lucas's birthday. I really wanted to bring Helen. After all, we had been dating for 6 months. But my daughter was categorical. "Dad, please don't bring her. It will be very awkward. Everyone will be commenting." As my friend Jack says, after 60, you don't just date a person, you date their entire family. And it's true. Every decision you make, you have to think about how it will affect your children, grandchildren, sons-in-law, daughters-in-law. And there's more. Helen has a special needs granddaughter who lives with her. The girl needs constant care. How am I, a 72-year-old man, going to adapt to this reality? And if I need to help, do I have the physical ability for that? Once, during a session with my psychologist, yes, I started therapy because of all this, she told me, "Mr. Albert, you need to live your life. But how can I do that without hurting anyone? Without seeming disrespectful to my late wife's memory? Without creating conflict with my children? As my younger sister says, family is like a spider web. You touch one thread and it shakes the whole structure. You know, when you reach my age, 70 years old, you carry a lot of history on your shoulders. The divorce I had with Teresa, after 28 years of marriage, wasn't just a separation. It was as if they had split my life in half. Let me tell you how it was. I worked 30 years at a company, saving every penny to build our assets. We had a beautiful house in Pine Valley, an apartment at the beach. After the divorce, I had to sell everything to split the assets. I ended up living in a small apartment, starting from scratch at 62 years old. The financial part wasn't even the worst. It was losing my identity, you know. For almost 3 decades, I was Teresa's husband, the boy's father, the head of the family. Suddenly, I became just Mr. John, the divorced guy from 402. Even today, when I go to the market and meet acquaintances, some look away. Others give me that pitying look. My friend Eric always says, "John, you need to forget about this." But how can I forget when I have to deposit alimony every month? When I see my ex-wife posting happy pictures with her new husband on the social media, my daughter shows me. There was a time I tried dating about 2 years after the divorce. I met Mrs. Clara at church, a very special woman. But the first time she wanted to see my house, I froze. The apartment I live in now is much simpler than what I had before. I felt ashamed, made up excuses. In the end, she gave up on me. And then there are the children. Oh, the children. My oldest still hasn't forgiven me for the divorce. He says I destroyed the family. He didn't even come to my 70th birthday. How am I going to introduce a new girlfriend to him if he barely speaks to me? The worst part is that now, with every new relationship, I start off suspicious. If a lady shows interest, I start thinking, does she really want my company or is she eyeing my apartment? If someone invites me out, I immediately imagine, will they want me to pay for everything, like Teresa used to do? As my sister Martha says, we carry scars not just on our body but in our soul too, and she doesn't even know the half of it. There are nights I still wake up startled, remembering the day I had to take my things out of the house. 35 years of life inside a few boxes. And the worst part is that at our age, everyone has a similar story to tell. In the domino group at the park, each one has their battle scar to show. One lost his house, another his friends, another his trust in relationships. You know, there are nights I lie in my bed and keep thinking, and when I get older, what will it be like? And I'm already 73. And although today I can do everything on my own, I know time doesn't stop. The other day I slipped in the bathroom. Nothing serious, thank God, but it took me about 10 minutes to get up on my own. It was the first time I felt real fear. I've been living alone for 8 years since Marlene passed away, and I've always prided myself on my independence. But that day was different. My neighbor, Mr. Augustus, had a stroke last year. You know who took care of him? His wife. I would watch from the window as she pushed his wheelchair, fed him with all the patience in the world. Then I ask myself, and me, who will take care of me if something like that happens? Of course I have my children. Sandra, my youngest, always says, "Dad, don't worry, we'll take care of you." But she has 3 young children, works all day. How can I want to be another burden in her life? There was a time I went to visit my friend Jim in a nursing home. Nice place, clean, attentive nurses. But you know what caught my attention? Those who had partners received visits every day. The single ones sometimes went weeks without seeing anyone besides the staff. My doctor keeps saying I need to exercise, keep my mind active. I even started doing crossword puzzles. But there are things no exercise can solve. The other day I needed to change a light bulb. I had to wait 3 days until my son could come to my house to do it. If I had a companion, as Mrs. Celeste, my 81-year-old neighbor, says, loneliness doesn't scare you as much when you're younger. The problem is when your legs start to fail, your eyesight isn't the same anymore, and you realize you can't rely just on yourself. Sometimes I catch myself thinking, if I shouldn't have given Mrs. Isora a chance, that lady I met in the senior group. She showed interest, you know, but at the time I thought I wanted to enjoy my freedom. Now I wonder if I wasn't being foolish. And it's not just about physical care, it's the companionship itself. There are days I just wish I had someone to talk to share an afternoon coffee, to complain about the price of medicine that went up. The children have their own lives. Friends are becoming increasingly rare. Once my 12-year-old grandson asked me, "Grandpa, why don't you get a girlfriend?" At the time I laughed and changed the subject, but then I kept thinking, isn't it time to set aside the fear and try again? As my mother used to say, there's no age limit for happiness. But then I look in the mirror, see the white hair, the wrinkles, the belly, and I think, do I still have a chance? Will anyone want a grumpy old man like me? It's complicated, you know? We want to have someone, but we also don't want to bother, don't want to be rejected, don't want to start something that we might not have much time to live. As my friend Ben says, we spend our whole lives wanting to get old, and when we do, we don't know exactly what to do with this old age.